So, I'm just gonna come out and say it. I am by no means an expert when it comes to the 5th generation of Armored Core here. The last time I played the multiplayer was around 11 years ago. And yeah, both these games have a heavy focus on the multiplayer. I did play through the games recently for the making of this video, but yeah, I didn't have access to the multiplayer. And even if I did, I got a feeling that I'd be waiting a while to find a match. I do want to take a second to tell you that if you've not watched the previous videos, definitely go check them out, as I'm not going to be repeating myself on topics that we've already covered in the previous series overview videos. But before we get farther in, let's roll the intro. Armored Core 5 is my least favorite Armored Core game. This was actually the first game I ever pre-ordered. I was so excited to play it I made a Japanese Microsoft account just so I could play the demo of the game, since it came out 2 months early over there. The day of release I woke my ass up early and longboarded a total of 5 miles just to play this game, even ditching school for this very special occasion. And let me just say it let me down big time. Funny enough, I can say the exact same thing about Dark Souls 2, pretty much the same story. I guess think of Dark Souls 2 as the Armored Core 5 of the Souls series. Now, most of my criticism is towards Armored Core 5. I feel like Verdict Day did the best it could to salvage this generation, but unfortunately these first complaints are shared between both games. If I had to briefly describe 5th gen, it would be like nails on the chalkboard. Now, at least you can turn down the sound effects, but what you can't really turn down is the annoying robot voice every time you run low on energy, or enter scan mode.
System, scan mode. Energy at 30%. Energy at 30%. System energy at 30%.
Can't be happening! Let these buckets beat me!
Next thing we need to do is take a look at the HUD for a quick second. It's straight up the most invasive HUD I can think of in a video game. You can lower the opacity, but yeah, it's the HUD. The more you make it transparent, the harder it is to see your health and ammo bar. It's so weird how 4th gen made the HUD more minimalistic while somehow shoving more information on the screen, just for 5th gen to not even revert the changes to the HUD, but make it way worse than all the previous Armored Core games. Now I'm sure almost everyone can agree with me up to this point, but from here on I'm going to be getting opinionated when it comes to all the remaining changes. Armored Core 5 was made with one thing in mind: big multiplayer team battles. Now this hasn't really been possible in any of the previous Armored Core games. 4th gen was way too fast and it would be far too easy to run up behind enemies, causing total chaos. 4th gen's main focus with multiplayer was mostly 1v1s because of this, but also I could see all the Armored Core games even before that having issues. The reason for this is how the games were made. Mechs had a lot of health but not a lot of ammo, probably due to the game being balanced more for a single player experience. Ammo in those games mattered, and trying not to run out of it just in a simple one-on-one mech fight was something you had to make sacrifices for. So clearly if FromSoft wanted to focus on big 4v4 team battles, they were going to have to make some serious changes, and that's exactly what they did. And at that, even giving the game a whole new look. Now, some people like it, but a lot of these parts have this weird old school alternative history style to them. Kinda something you would see out of Fallout 4 with power armor and nuclear cars. Quite a few of these parts literally have scrap bolted onto them, like this car door for example. Even some of the more advanced looking parts have a strange sort of look to them, almost like a tin banger shaped some of the parts by hand. Mechs in previous games have always been top of the line technology, crafted by precision machines and engineered by some of the smartest minds in the world. So yeah, it's just a whole different vibe and I really don't like it. Now these parts do match up with the lore of 5th gen's universe, which we'll get more into during story time. So yeah, back to the changes. No longer will you be taking to the skies like previous games. Even in the original Armored Core, there was areas focused on vertical platforming, like when you had to make your way up after picking up the Moonlight Blade, or flying up to all these different pillars to make your way to the final boss. Instead of boosting up into the air, the game takes a more grounded approach, no doubt for the sole purpose of big team battles. You can still overboost, and whenever you do you gain a little bit of height, and later in Verdict Day you can just straight up make a mech that's so energy efficient that you can just overboost indefinitely. But other than that, for the most part there isn't really any flying. Instead of flying you can wall jump up and off of buildings or other structures. That paired with quick boosting, you can still move kinda fast in a somewhat skilled manner. And with being able to wall jump, most of the levels have a good amount of obstacles and buildings around, and with the game focused on a slower pace with a more leveled play style, they were able to put a lot more detail into the environments. There's no doubt this city looks better than any of the cities in the previous Armored Core games, but sadly this detail came with the price of just not having a lot of maps. I want to say there's about 7 maps here in Armored Core 5, and that's really not enough. Moving on, instead of Primal Armor, they've decided to get rid of it and replace it with a new damage type. So now we got 3 different damage types. There's kinetic, thermal, and now chemical. The thing is, you still only have access to 4 weapons, 5 if you include missiles. This means if you're fighting an opponent for the first time, there's a chance you won't be properly equipped to defeat them. A prime example of this was in Armored Core 5, where I worked my way up to a boss, only to find out I didn't have the proper damage type to significantly damage it, causing me to restart the whole mission, wasting at least 15 minutes of my time. And also how they implement these damage types is kinda dumb. Light parts is physical, medium is chemical, and heavy parts is energy. Heavy parts are heavy enough to have a bit of the other 2 damage types defended against, but for the most part you're going to be building around these defensive stats. This means if you want to only use lightweight parts, you're going to get destroyed by every damage type other than kinetic, and so on for all the different weights. This was a horrible decision, and when you combine the fact that Armored Core 5 had very little parts, it turns into using the same few designs over and over again. This is kinda what drove me away from the game back in the day, because I'd only really see the same few AC setups every time I played online. Continuing on, they've added in a new scan mode that thankfully gets most of the HUD elements away from the middle of the screen, but instead replaces it with a blue filter. It really is just annoying and adds to the migraine, but it does have a purpose. When you're in scan mode, your weapons are no longer active, and in turn your energy regeneration is increased. You can also read the stats of opponents as long as they're in line of sight, or if you've shot a recon unit in their direction. But good luck though if there's 3 or more enemies all bundled close to each other. It makes it almost impossible to scan a single person. Looking at recons, they're kinda like a sticky sonar device, where if an enemy is close, you can see them and read their stats even through walls, or just from a much farther distance away. And there's different types too. There's some recons that float above your head, or some you can shoot really far. And of course there's stats behind them too. You might get a longer activation time with the trade-off of having a different size radius, or maybe they don't last for as long on the ground. So anyways, along with multiplayer matches being 4v4, there's also an operator position for each team. And if I remember correctly, their main purpose was to just drop recon units all over the place and create markers for your teammates. I remember the operator's job being kinda useless, but yeah, as I said, it's been like 11 years since I played the multiplayer. So moving back to scan mode, the gameplay loop boils down to this. If you're not in combat, have scan mode engaged at all times. Once you've figured out your opponent's defenses, turn off scan mode to fight them. If you're running low on energy or if your opponent's too far away or out of sight, go ahead and enter scan mode, and just repeat this process. Now some people hate the idea of scan mode. Having to switch back and forth between different modes can be repetitive, but I honestly think if they didn't have scan mode, there just wouldn't be a lot of depth to the gameplay. And by no means am I saying that I actually like scan mode. I'm just saying if it wasn't in the game, then the gameplay would probably be pretty boring. The big issue, of course, is the AI constantly telling you that you're entering combat or scan mode. That is, if it's not telling you your energy's at 30%. Unfortunately, since there's no map, you're reliant on scan mode for finding enemies. And for multiplayer this might be fine, but I ran into a few missions in both 5 and Verdict Day, where I was running around trying to find a single enemy that was keeping me from finishing the mission. Single player missions were really thrown under the bus, especially in 5, and trust me, I'll get around to talking about it. Next up, the game might have kept quick boosting, but it didn't keep quick turning, which is extremely annoying when you're just trying to keep up with a fast moving enemy. If you jump off a wall, you get an increase in turning for like half a second, and you can still drift like you could in Armored Core 4 and for Answer. I think I forgot to mention it though in that video. So pretty much if you boost forward fast and deactivate your boosters, you can somewhat quickly turn around. The biggest issue with this is that you have to be on the ground, and if you're somewhat good at the game, you're going to be spending a lot of your time in air jumping between buildings. All in all, the removal of quick turning is more frustrating than anything else. Ever since the second Armored Core game on the PS2, you could equip a part that allowed for quick turning, and honestly it seems like it would be infinitely more useful in this game. There's also this strong aim assist that tries to keep your opponent in the middle of the screen, so if you see them moving more towards the side of you trying to get behind your back, there's really no way to compensate for it. You just kinda lose lock and that's that. Also, the auto aim sometimes has issues with enemies that are somewhat far away, depending on how much bullet drop your weapon has. To keep going with the changes, back weapons no longer exist. Instead, they're just more hanger units that you can shove more arm weapons on. And since missile launchers in the previous game usually got bolted onto your back, they've instead been planted into your shoulders. Both of these changes are horrible. There's a pretty cool weapon swap animation, but honestly, anytime I think of a legendary Armored Core from previous games, I think of them with a big heavy cannon strapped to their back. Kinda like 9-Ball that had a grenade launcher bolted on, or Ares from Armored Core 2 that had an energy cannon. Also, with missile launchers not being visible, you don't really see any cool firing animations like the wheelings from the previous game. And that being said, there's even less build variety since you can't really make a missile launcher build. Every mech just has some sustaining fire through shoulder missiles, and that's that. Now Verdict Day somewhat added on to this, but we'll talk about that more later. So going back to the topic of back weapons, it's not like they added more arm weapons to make up for it. Your selection is pretty slim, and it's fair to say the more parts in an Armored Core game, the better it usually is. It's sad because I think they did a really good job balancing the back weapons in the last game. I really just couldn't even tell you why they got removed. So something weird they implemented to make up for the lack of weapons was different rarities of weapons. It's pretty much the same exact weapons as their previous models, it's just straight up better. Now these could be found in the online shop, and the online shop is something where players could actually buy and sell parts to other people online, kind of like the Grand Exchange in RuneScape. On the topic of part rarity though, I just think it's really stupid. A new player might hop into the game for the multiplayer, only to find out his rifle just does less damage than his opponent's, cause why not? Thankfully they got removed in Verdict Day. It's just such a weird design decision. Skill should be enough to decide a winner and loser. A new player should not be at a disadvantage simply for not owning a rarer version of the same gun. This is kinda some sort of shit you would expect to see from a pay-to-win game. And now that we covered all the changes, we can get into the horrible single player. Starting with that online shop. I've already said what it is, but I've yet to mention that Armored Core 5 servers were shut down just a little over 2 years after the game's release, and this means no access to buying upgraded weapons. And with that, we should also talk about the regular shop. As you level up your team rank, the shop will expand more and more. And something really funny here is if you were new to the game, you could simply join a team that was over the rank of 50 and instantly have access to the entire shop. And of course, with the servers being shut down, you're forced to start a new team. And leveling up your team to open up more parts in the shop is pretty slow. I actually ran into an issue where I was getting destroyed simply because I didn't have a wide selection of parts. In other words, if you want to have an easier time progressing in the game, you're going to have to do a lot of side missions. And if you were watching my live stream, you probably noticed I didn't make it too far in Armored Core 5, but I actually went back and busted out a bunch of optional missions, and unfortunately the shop didn't really expand, or at least it didn't feel like it. It could have simply been the fact that the game just doesn't really have that many parts to begin with. So continuing on, Armored Core 5 decided to do something a bit different with their main missions. Instead of the missions only being around 5 to 10 minutes, they've been stretched out to about 15 to 20 minutes. And I found this really annoying. It's frustrating because as missions expand, that briefing they filled you in on becomes farther and farther from the reality of the situation. To give you an example, this mission wants us to investigate 3 power plants to gather resources. Only by the end of it, you're fighting what might as well be considered an arms fort. Now to make up for these longer missions, they've put in resupply areas throughout the map. And not only can you repair your mech and fill up ammo, but you can also change parts on your AC. They also added in checkpoints to missions, so if you die, you don't have to start all the way at the beginning. But in one mission in particular, I kinda got screwed over by a checkpoint, as it saved right as soon as I entered a boss battle, and of course how the damage system works, I got unlucky and didn't bring the correct weapons to damage them, so I pretty much had to restart the whole mission. I really don't know what to say with these repair stations and checkpoints. It just seems like a lazy way for them to keep you in the fight, instead of actually making a balanced mission. It's just really not exciting. If you take a bunch of damage or run out of ammo, you pretty much just run back to a refill station. And when people say an open world Armored Core game wouldn't be a bad idea, my mind immediately flashes to these two things: checkpoints and refill stations all over the map. It's boring, it's time consuming, and it just doesn't work out when it comes to making a balanced, enjoyable stage. Sadly, my issues with missions though extends farther than just long missions being bad. As I said before, there's only about 7 stages, and with 9 main missions and something like 90 optional missions, you best believe it's gonna get old really fast. Just looking through the story missions alone, there's a specific location that gets reused like 4 times. And this is all compounded with the fact that there's very few enemies in the game. I want to say there's something like 10 different regular enemies enemies you'll be fighting throughout all these missions, and that really is a pathetic number. So yeah, this is kind of where you can see that there was a very small focus on the single player experience. There's a few cool missions in the game, like this mission where you have to destroy a train going around a city, but these interesting missions are just few and far between. The only cool thing about this game is they brought hidden parts back, and sadly instead of seeing a shiny new AC part on the ground, it's just a heap of scrap, literally. Moving on, the story is pretty lackluster too, with general world building being the only thing worth talking about. The game takes place sometime after Armored Core 4 Answer, with Kojima particles totally destroying the world. And with these Kojima particles doing so much damage, humanity somehow agreed upon never using Kojima particles again. And that's the reason why we don't have cool energy shields. Now, I'm not sure about you, but I really don't think corporations would just trust each other enough to stop using this technology altogether. This is today's equivalent of every country agreeing to deactivate their nuclear weapons, and blindly just trusting that everyone else will do the same. And this makes me think that the true ending of Armored Core 4 Answer is the destruction ending, where the player character wipes out the cradles and probably any other form of power, possibly causing Kojima technology to fade out of existence. And the story from here just really isn't all that interesting. And with that said, I'm only going to briefly cover it, seeing how the story consists of 10 missions, including the tutorial. You play as an AC pilot belonging to a group of rebels, and you're trying to stop an evil tyrant by the name of Father who rules over the world. He's the head of a group called the Company. You fight back against Father's rule, eventually capture him, only for the corporation to kill him along with the rebels that captured him. And you continue the story for a few missions until you wipe out all of the corporation. Now what's really funny is how much emotion they try to shove into this extremely short story. You got your helicopter pilot, who at the start of the game is pretty much all about the Benjamins, only for her to finally come around to the cause at the end, just to be sniped out of the sky literally right after she says that maybe money isn't everything.
The old me would have laughed at the idea, but I guess I've changed. Maybe money isn't everything. Besides, it'd be more fun to tag along with you guys. Oh well, I was ready for a change anyway.
Then you got this soy boy that, despite being afraid of everything, decides to betray you halfway through the game, switching to the side of Father. There's like 2 cutscenes in this game where this guy straight up gets bitch slapped by the female helicopter pilot.
I agree with you, RD, but this conversation's between me and the boss. Small fry can butt out.
Ouch! Hey!
And yeah, after he joins the enemy team, they try to work him up into being some sort of possible future legend or something. And another little funny bit is, I swear the first half of the game, all the communications on the intercom are just these 2 ladies bitching at each other. Just straight up having a cat fight.
You knew what that was, didn't you, Rosary? Maybe, but your loyal servant told me to keep my mouth shut, so... That's why you didn't say anything? Who the hell does he think he is? I figured your star pilot was too good to bite the dust anyway.
But having more info might have improved our chances.
Wow, you really do give a damn. I'm touched. But that alone won't win wars.
You're quite rude, you know.
I get that a lot.
It's like, yeah, we're the rebels, we're at such a disadvantage, and they literally can't be professional enough to take a mission seriously.
If we see any enemies, take them out.
Good answer. I knew you had it in you.
Why, you condescending...
And the only time this finally ends is when Soy Boy RD runs off to the other side, which somehow switches the tone of the game to be a bit more serious. You know, I can't really think of a cringier story and group of people in an Armored Core game. Yeah, you might have gotten some hilarious dialogue from 9ball in the PS1 games.
I heard you've been looking for me. I don't care who you are. No one can defeat me.
But none of the games really tried to push this sort of group character building crap on you, and with that, it's such a short length of time. Armored Core for the most part has always tried to take itself seriously, kind of having a dark, depressing mood to it, and Armored Core 5 here just isn't that. Now despite me trashing this game, I decided to save one feature for the end, something that's actually pretty cool, and that is the overred weapons. These are giant weapons that take up both back slots. They all look really cool and you can just tell that the developers put a lot of attention into them. All of these overred weapons can pretty much one-shot just about anything in the game, but there's a few downsides. Firstly, the horrible sound.
Unknown unit has connected. Recommending immediate termination of use. Objective complete. System returning.
They also take a long time to charge up and even damage you while you use them. The weapon's on a cooldown timer though, and if you fire it, it goes down even faster. Now unless you make a build around these weapons, you're only really going to get off one shot, and whenever your overred mode finally runs out, you're left with like no energy for quite a bit of time. So hopefully you found a good wall to hide behind. Now something that's cool is you do get unlimited energy whenever you're in this overred mode, so that's nice. Some of these overred weapons just straight up remove your arm whenever you activate them. Sadly, the biggest issue with these weapons is there's no way to drop these bad boys on the ground after using them. All of these weapons were some of the coolest in the series, but unfortunately they were extremely situational. And before we jump over to Verdict Day, I forgot to mention one thing. These missions might all be boring as shit, but you can at least do it with one other person. Every single mission has an extra slot, so you can invite your friend. A game can be a lot more enjoyable just having a friend there to play it with, but as I said before, the game's servers are down, so it's probably not something we're going to take advantage of. And Verdict Day even takes it one step farther, so let's quickly get into that game. Verdict Day is a game I regret not buying and playing on release. It really did the best it could trying to make a better game with Armored Core 5 at its base. That being said, there's some issues the game fixes, and some it doesn't. Firstly, what it didn't fix. The HUD seems to be a bit thinner, but it's still pretty bad. The repetitive dialogue, and lastly, my blown out eardrums from taking damage. Now what Verdict Day has improved upon is the missions. They've gone back to the short 5 to 10 minute time for missions, and instead sprinkled in some mandatory optional missions. I know those two words don't really go together, but yeah, they're pretty much optional missions with a little bit of story built into them. Unfortunately, there's only a few new enemy types, which really sucks, but once again, the main focus on these games was all multiplayer, so I don't know what I was really expecting. Now, Verdict Day did add in a lot of new stages. Every new story mission that I'd get to, it would have its own unique stage to it, and of course, the best improvement to Verdict Day is they added in a crap ton more parts. I swear parts are like the deciding factor in what makes a good Armored Core game. Now, they did do some cool shit with these new parts, like some of them are arm weapons. They have a really awesome transforming animation, and they've also done something a little bit different with the missile hanger that's in your shoulder. You can still put missiles in there, but now if you want, you can equip the equivalent of optional parts from previous games. For example, doing more damage with your energy weapon, or the one that I used a lot was increasing my lock-on time. Now, one little thing that's nice that they added back in is whenever you beat an AC or learn about a new organization, you get a little piece of mail that fills you in on a bunch of information for them. But moving on, there's one thing that separates this game from any other Armored Core game in the series, and that is building your own unmanned AC to accompany you in missions. You can of course still hire people online, but maybe if you're playing offline mode, you can try to make one of these things. And building these UNACs is the most detailed thing I've ever seen in an Armored Core game. I watched a 30-minute tutorial on how to build one of these things, and it didn't even scratch the surface. So of course, just like your own AC, you're in charge of equipping whatever you want on it. Now, where this really goes in depth is programming. You can program everything, like how far away your UNAC will engage the target, or what target the UNAC even decides to attack. You can set specific instructions for when you want to change your weapons, or enter scan mode or whatever. You can even change how a UNAC will like initiate combat and just generally how it will move. There's just so much to this. And it's funny because one of my wishes for Armored Core 6 was for there to be a campaign designed around 2 players, being able to program your own AC if you decided to play offline. And yeah, that just fully came true in this game. Like, the 30-minute tutorial didn't even scratch the surface. There's so much here. It's insane. Like, multiple people have told me stories how the UNACs that they've built have literally just destroyed the entire game, just plowed through the whole game. And these UNACs could even keep up with really good players. It's really unfortunate because I don't think we're ever gonna see something like this again. I just wish this game was still relevant so that I could really tinker around with all this stuff. But who knows, all I gotta say is I hope we see something like this in the future eventually. And I think that covers everything for Verdict Day. So let's move on to the story. The setting is 100 years after Armored Core 5. The Kojima contamination that's been stopping humanity from spreading on the surface has subsided. And with the planet being explored, these strange technological towers have been discovered. The possession of these towers would start a new war, with 3 different factions vying over their possibly untapped power. We play as an AC pilot for a mercenary squad. There's us, our helicopter pilot Fat Man, who's earned an excellent reputation in the field, and Maggie, who was a once legendary AC pilot who was forced into retirement due to a group of unidentified ACs nicknamed the Reaper Squad. Us mercenaries aren't the only ones profiting off the war though, as a company called the Foundation has been manufacturing UNACs and selling them to all the different factions. As the game goes on, we learn a few things. The UNACs have been malfunctioning, turning on their owners. This wasn't an accident though, as we come to find out the Foundation is responsible for this. Also, it turns out that mysterious Reaper Squad is also ran by this same corporation. As more time goes by, the battlefield gets more and more dangerous, that is for anybody that isn't the Foundation. Never before seen technology starts entering the battlefield, and as things start to really heat up, our operator decides to go her separate way, betraying us and joining the Foundation. After jealousy, the once legendary AC pilot returns from retirement. This would lead to us fighting it out on the battlefield, with us coming out on top. And this brings us to the final mission, having to take out the leader of the Reaper Squad, who's piloting a rebuilt Next once lost to history.
You have knowledge and experience gained from walking countless battlefields, and now you are armed with combat data from the UNACs. And on top of that, this craft will ensure your victory.
You seek a world of endless war and destruction. On that, we can agree. The world of order built by the 3 forces is not one I can live in.
And so you abandoned mankind to destroy it?
There is no place for me other than the battlefield, to live as I please and die a senseless death. That is who I am, not a mere man of flesh. War is part of my existence.
If you've played Armored Core for Answer at all, the song playing in the background might sound familiar.
Combat mode.
You want
System
the operation?
scan mode.
Here's that crazy old bastard.
Call me what you want. From my point of view, all of mankind is crazy. There are no exceptions.
Energy at 30%. System combat mode. AC down.
No, it can't be. Is that what you wanted me to say? All is proceeding as planned.
Generator output clock
destruction upon the world in the past. The Dark Raven is nothing but an absurd myth, just like hope for mankind. Mankind will be destroyed by its own hand.
Enough words. They are meaningless now. Show me what you can do.
AC damage critical. Take evasive action.
Are you happy now? You're the one lying broken.
I refuse to believe that mankind has hope. I will never forgive the filthy world that destroyed my life and everything in it. My weapons are already in action. The towers power them. They will continue on without me. The battle for the towers has begun. It will continue until all is in ruin. But if you think you are different, then carry on. You have that right and responsibility.
That's exactly what we'll do. As long as we can still fight.
This was a really cool fight. A fight at the time that was probably expected to end the whole Armored Core series. It had the perfect amount of emotions to it, having to completely overcome a next when you're just nothing more than a piece of scrap, and the song in the background and just everything, it was delivered really well. But unfortunately, it's not that enjoyable from a gameplay standpoint. This fight is a tough one, but sadly that comes from the fact that this boss just has way too much health. Not to mention the boss constantly pops in and out of your lockbox, moving faster than you can even keep up with. I mean, it makes sense from a logical standpoint. Next far surpass whatever you call these pieces of scrap. It was a good fight to end the Armored Core series. Our reward for beating White Glint is every overred weapon from the previous game. Now, whenever the game ends, there's still more to do. You gotta rank up your team so you can unlock all the parts in the shop, and then there's the raid bosses. Now, these raid bosses are what the final boss was referring to. Unfortunately, they're multiplayer only, so I wasn't able to participate in them. But some of them are really cool. You get to refight the Spirit of Motherwill from Armored Core for answer, and of course it's been toned down to Armored Core 5's level. And there's also this crazy ass thing. But yeah, even if you're playing this game online, all I have to say is good luck finding people to do these fights with. And that was Verdict Day. And with that, the 5th generation of Armored Core. This game did everything right when it came to a direct sequel, but sadly it was forced to follow in Armored Core 5's footsteps. FromSoft decided to go all in on Red when it came to making a multiplayer game, and sadly for them it didn't pay off. Mecha games, at least here in the western side of the world, aren't really too popular. So yeah, focusing all your efforts on pretty much making the game multiplayer exclusive just really wasn't the smartest idea. In my honest opinion, 5th gen was the death of Armored Core. And thankfully, with what we've seen from the Armored Core 6 trailer, I don't think it's going to resemble these 5th gen games at all. After all, Miyazaki had nothing to do with 5th gen, and yeah, from what we've seen from the Armored Core 6 trailer, it's pretty easy to make an educated guess that it's not going to be like 5th gen. It's been almost 10 years since the last Armored Core game came out, and if it wasn't for the success of Miyazaki through the Souls games, and his love for Armored Core, I really don't think Armored Core 6 would be coming out. So here's hoping for the success of Armored Core 6, and I think that wraps up the Armored Core series pretty well. I think after watching my videos, everyone now has a pretty good idea on what Armored Core was and how it evolved. And you might be wondering what's next. There's still quite a few Armored Core games that I skipped over, and even though they might not deserve their own video, they at least deserve to be mentioned in some way. There's also a few, let's just call them Armored Core likes, that people have really been suggesting that I play and cover, so that could possibly be a thing. But honestly, for now I might just take it easy. Atomic Hearts and the System Shock remake are both coming out next month, so I'm definitely going to be busy playing those games. I might even live stream it, who knows. Anyways, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to do all the things that YouTubers usually ask you to do. And honestly, if you have not watched the previous game in the series, you should really check it out. It was kind of the pinnacle of the Armored Core series, and unfortunately after taking a long vacation, I don't think that video did as well as it should have. Not that it's about views, but it would just be a darn shame if this video got more views than the 4th gen video. And it's funny, the same exact thing happened to Silent Line, which is hands down my favorite Armored Core game. But anyways, I hope you guys all have a good day. Peace out.